So in this final module, we're going to look at some of the options available for inter-site connectivity within Azure. Now to begin, let's define inter-site connectivity. So this is really one of three things. You have an on-premises network and you want to connect that network to your virtual networks that reside in Azure. That's a site-to-site connectivity. You have two virtual networks in Azure that you want to connect together, VNet to VNet connectivity, or you have an individual machine that you want to be able to VPN directly into your Azure VNet. That's an example of point-to-site connectivity. Now, in all cases, there's a couple of options that you've got and that we're going to explore as we walk through. But these are the three primary categories of connectivity: site-to-site, which is your network to Azure, within Azure, and then from an individual machine to Azure, such as an administrator or a developer that just needs direct level of access to the resources running in the Azure Virtual Network. So the first one, and arguably the most difficult, is point-to-site VPN connectivity. Now, in this particular example, this uses the SSL tunneling protocol in order to connect, and it's based on certificates. So the process is a little elaborate. Now you can go on the Azure documentation and you can search for point-to-point setup. And there's a really detailed walkthrough that's really quite long and takes a little bit of time and it takes a little bit of expertise to complete. But at the end of the day, you configure an address space and a gateway in Azure. Then you have to generate and upload certificates so that the certificate used by the client matches the certificate that's stored in Azure, because the certificate is what's ultimately used for authentication, not usernames and passwords. So that process can take a little bit of time. Now we'll have a demo on how we do this and we'll walk through the process. You'll get to see it, but these are the high level steps. You set up a gateway in an address space and then you configure the certificates. From there, it's going to create, Azure will create a package which you can download and actually use that to establish the VPN. You'll get an IP address and you'll now be able to access resources on your Azure network. A VNet to VNet VPN is very similar in concept to what you would set up for a site-to-site VPN. So from what I would set up to go from on-premise to Azure is virtually the same as what I set up within Azure to go from VNet to VNet. It uses something called an Azure VPN gateway. So this is configuring an Azure VPN gateway is actually a really simple process. Within an Azure VNet, you create a gateway network, and then on that gateway network, you simply add a new gateway. If I flip over to my Azure portal here for a second, and I go look at my VNet, got my subnets, and so I can actually add a gateway subnet, and this is completely automatic. All right, once that gateway subnet is added, here it is, you can see it's available. I can actually now deploy a new virtual network gateway. And it's going to prompt me for things like whether it's VPN-based or ExpressRoute, the performance level of the gateway, and then the IP address and network configuration of the gateway. Now we're going to do walkthrough in the demos examples of how you set this up, but you can see that the process of deploying a gateway is relatively straightforward. Note the warning on bottom that this may take up to 45 minutes, and that is generally pretty accurate. You can have multiple gateways to establish cross-premises connectivity. For example, I can use subscription 2, connect to subscription 1 in the east, subscription 1 in the west, connect to subscription 1 in the east, allowing both subscriptions over here to actually talk to each other. So it does do transient connectivity because these are established connections. Bear in mind, though, that all this traffic is being routed over the public internet. So it's encrypted in the VPN, but this traffic leaves Azure, routes over the public internet, goes back into Azure in whatever the destination is. So it'll connect the two VNets together using a gateway, using the public internet as the transport. So the basic steps: connect your subscription, create your first network, have a public IP address available, create the gateway, create your second virtual network and its gateway, and then you connect the two gateways together. Each of those gateways takes about 45 minutes to deploy. The entire process, excluding the 45-minute deployment, doesn't actually take all that long. It's probably 15, 20 minutes worth of actual work. You do got to wait for the deployment to complete, so it's a great time to get a coffee or get lunch. Now, there's an alternative to gateways called VNet peering. Now, currently, and again, about midway through November, this is available within Azure region. So if I have two VNets, and those VNets are both East US, and I want to connect those VNets, I don't need to deploy Azure gateways. I can deploy what's called a peering relationship. The peering relationship will connect the two VNets together and configure routing automatically without the need of a gateway. And it's almost instantaneous. There's no deployment of the gateway. This is simply a routing rule internally. And the traffic never leaves Azure. It remains on all the Azure internal networks. Now, this is faster than a VPN. There's no public IP involved because it stays internal. However, they are not transitive. You have to ensure you do not have overlapping address spaces. And if you do make any address space changes, you've got to destroy the peering relationships, reestablish them, and that could be a fairly disruptive operation. But again, like all things with virtual networking, you want to ensure that you plan this well in advance so that you don't have any conflicts. Now, they are beginning the process within Azure of what's called global VNet peering. And this is the notion of using the Azure global networks to connect two different VNets together in different regions. Presently, there's only very few regions, maybe 3 or 4, that this is available in, but this is something to keep an eye on, that peering is being extended so that if you have, for example, East US and West US, you don't need gateways and VPNs to connect those VNets. You can now use peering to connect those VNets. You still need the gateways if you want to exit and come back into Azure on a private network, but peering vastly simplifies connecting individual VNets within different regions as that becomes available globally. Connecting your on-premises network to Azure excuse me, can be done with a VPN, or if you need extremely fast connectivity, extremely low latency, you can use what's called Azure Express Route. Now, Azure Express Route is provided by certain partners, right? This is not something that is generally available to everybody. You have to partner with one of the Express Route partners. These are examples of what are essentially internet connectivity companies all over the world, level 3, Verizon, Orange, Bell, AT&T, etc. These are all over the world that partner with Microsoft to deliver Azure Express Route connectivity. So if you, for example, take one of those partners, they can install a connection on your on-premises, in your own data center, on-premises network, and then express route that traffic directly into one of Azure's edge routers. What that's going to do is give you faster connections, lower latency, and better availability. So if you are very highly dependent on using Azure to extend your data center, and you want the types of connectivity that you would have within your own data center, such as private virtual networks, very high throughput rates, very low latency, then ExpressRoute is the capability within Azure that is available to you. Setting it up within Azure is fairly simple. It's merely a matter of establishing a VPN gateway, designated as ExpressRoute, and then on the other side doing the same thing. The actual express routing portion of it itself is between your ISP and Azure. That's an internal thing they do. So you establish that business relationship, establish the proper connectivity, and you can now configure ExpressRoute and benefit from that. So that's our look at the different inter-site connectivity options that we have available within Azure for site-to-site, VNet to VNet, and also for individual users with client-to-site or point-to-site connectivity.